Okay, great. We'll get started. Welcome everyone to this IAQM webinar, the role of local authorities in managing air pollution. Today we are delighted to be joined by Davide Pascarella. Davide is a Principal Air Quality Officer at the Regulatory Services Partnership, serving the London boroughs of Merton, Richmond upon Thames and Wandsworth, and he has over 15 years of experience in the public sector. He is also a member of the IAQM committee. In this webinar, Davide will discuss the implications of the Environment Bill on local government's regulatory framework around smoke control areas. As always, there will be a chance for questions at the end of the presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and I will then ask these on your behalf later on. This presentation is also being recorded and will be uploaded to the IES YouTube channel. Thank you very much for logging in. It's great to see so many of you here today. And I will now hand over to Davide. Thank you.
Thanks, Edney. Yes, so let's start as I got a few slides to go through. First of all, I will start discussing about some domestic burn emissions studies and what we know so far about PM 2.5 from domestic burning. And then I will explore on some upcoming new regulations. As you can see here, the Environment Bill, the Air Quality Regs 2020 and the Ecodesign. Then I will explore the enforcement role for a local authority. And finally, we're just gonna discuss in a couple of slides about what could be the opportunity and the challenges for the local authorities. Right, let's start with the domestic consumption of solid fuel, gas and natural gas in the UK between 1990 and 2017. Right, historically, the British households have relied heavily on solid fuel for space heating. In the 1950s, most homes had an open fire burning, a combination of wood and coal. Emissions were generally unabated and unregulated, with the burn of poor quality fuel such as high sulfur coal leading to several reduced air quality and great smoke, such as in London in 1952. Then in response, the Clean Air Act in 1952 established smoke control areas, and together with a wide-scale uptake of natural gas heating, solid fuel consumption has continued to decrease. So, as you can see on this chart, since 1990, the solid fuel consumption has reduced by over 86%, where the gas consumption has remained steady, as shown here. Right. As we already know, there are several sources of air pollution and are all included into the national emissions inventory. For example, we have road transport, manufacturing industries and construction, industrial processes, but I want to point about the residential and the small scale commercial combustion. That is a major source too. We normally focus on road transport, but I just want to flag up the residential and commercial combustion. PM10 and PM 2.5 has a wider range of sources and emissions, and domestic solid fuel consumption can be an important factor for local air pollution in some areas. Also, there are other pollutants associated with the solid fuel use, like sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compound, carbon monoxide, heavy metal, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, and black carbon. There are scientific literature on health impact, growing body of evidence of PM 2.5 clear links to short and long-term health impact. Therefore, population exposure is a growing focus for policy. Air quality standards include population exposure reduction to reduce health impact. Right. This chart shows shows the trend in annual air pollution in the UK from 1970 to 2017. In recent times, there has been a decline in all emissions, as you can see, with some control measures impacting multiple pollutants. The pink and red line trends are about the PM10 and PM2.5. The trends in PM emissions have been steadily reducing since 1970, with the PM10 and PM2.5 showing the same trend. The decline has been driven by the move away from the domestic burning of coal in open fires in the 70s and 80s. The reduction in vehicle exhaust emissions due to stricter emission standard introduced in 1996 have also contributed to the decline in total PM. Also, the increase in traffic volume and the increase in non-exhausted emissions, tires and brakes, have partially offset the reduction. PM from industrial sources have also been reduced due to the decline of the manufacturing industry and improvement in emissions control. In relation to PM emission, additional reduction target will assist the central and local government to improve air quality. So overall, air pollution has reduced significantly in the recent years, with emissions of fine particle matter falling 9% in the last decade. But we know there is more to do, and domestic burning is a major contributor. So pick up this study was conducted by King's College National Physical Laboratory in 2017. It was a specific study on airborne particles from wood burning in different UK cities. It was the first systematic quantification of wood burning mass concentration across 16 cities and 4 rural locations between 2009 and 2016. The data collected came from the DEFRA black carbon network using ethylometer analyzers. From the conclusion of the study, the wildwood burn is a common practice of residential heating in rural areas. It started to become a generalized practice in urban areas to contributing to ambient particulate matter concentration. There was a government survey carried out in 2015 that found 7.5 of the UK homes burned wood. And as already mentioned in my previous slide, the smoke from wood burn is made up of a mixture of gases such as carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and fine particles. Wood smoke also contains several air pollutants that contribute to the deterioration of urban air quality. Other studies have evidenced the link between the short-term exposure to PM from wood smoke and the adverse health effect. And there is no evidence that particles from wood smoke are less toxic than other particles from other sources. Same type. Conclusion of their study, they reported that air pollution from wood burning was greatest in winter and almost absent in summer. The mean winter time on PM from wood burning varied between cities, ranging between 9.2 and 2.7 microgram per cubic meter. It was estimated that wood burning was between 23% and 31% of the urban derived PM 2.5 in London and Birmingham, making control of wood burning an important urban issue. In most cities, wood burning PM concentration were greater in evening, clearly indicating residential combustion, and they were greater at the weekends. The current urban wood burn is a large part decorative and is not being used as a primary heating. That was the outcome of the report. And from a policy perspective, the ambient impact from wood burn will have in the next years greatest effect on the public health framework indicator based on average of PM 2.5 and on the PM 2.5 exposure reduction as we would like to see. It will also affect progress toward the attainment of WHO annual mean guidelines for this pollutant. Basically, on an annual basis, wood burning PM 2.5 range between 4 to 6% across rural areas and between 6 to 9% average across urban areas, as reported in the table on your right. So there is a risk that future gas and oil prices may encourage householders to use more biomass combustion as a source of domestic heat through the use of, example, multi-fuel stoves. And it's clearly suggested that for many, the wood burning within an urban areas is a lifestyle choice, either for decoration or secondary heating. The report concludes that there is a clear need to fully consider domestic wood burning within the remit of an air quality management for major urban areas in order to ensure that increasing wood burning activities don't offset substantial investment in schemes to abate traffic pollution. So it's interesting to compare policy and in particular current and planned emission limits for small-scale biomass installation and the one for vehicle sources. But we should keep in mind that not all forms of domestic burning are equally polluting. It depends about the type of appliance, how well it's used and maintained, and what fuels are burning it. All make a big difference to how much pollution is produced. Significant air quality benefit can be released through a new efficient appliance as compared with an old stove or an open fire. There are simple steps that households can take to limit emissions, using cleaner fuels in a cleaner appliance, which is installed by a competent person knowing how to operate efficiently and ensuring that the chimneys are regularly swept, will all make a big difference. Right, as I mentioned, there are a few upcoming legislation that will have an impact on wood burning, domestic burning. One of that is the environment bill that has completed its committee stage and that day one of its report stage in the House of Commons. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in exceptional pressure on the parliamentary timetable, which has reduced the amount of parliamentary time available for the scrutiny of legislation. So carry over the bill to the next session when it will complete the report stage and head to the House of Lords for full scrutiny. The government has confirmed the environment bill will be carried over to the next parliamentary session. So the environment bill so far is split in 8 parts, 19 schedules, and a total of 248 pages. So it's quite a big document. And I highlight in red on my slide about the Schedule 12 because it's related to amendment of the Clean Air Act. And this amendment will have an impact on the smoke control area. But let's see more in details what's gonna change. So Schedule 12 is going to be applied to the smoke control areas and is replacing the criminal offense of emitting smoke from a chimney in a smoke control area with a civil penalty regime that will vary from a minimum amount of £175 to a maximum amount of £300. This regime will not include previously available defenses, but that means you should facilitate enforcement rules. Other amendments create offences related to the purchase and sale of controlled solid fuel in a smoke control areas in England. So I'm sure you are aware about the smoke control area, but just in case you are not, as I just mentioned smoke control areas, we can just quick go through and just see again what means smoke control areas. So are specific areas designated by the local councils where it's illegal to allow smoke emissions from a chimney of a building. The local authorities may have declared the whole or part of the district of the authority to be a smoke control area with a smoke control order. It's also an offense to acquire an unauthorized fuel for use within a smoke control area, unless it's used in an exempt appliance. Exempt appliance generally referred to as DEFRA approved or smoke exempt and must be operated at all times in accordance with the manufacturing instructions. The smoke control area or smoke control zone, they are sometimes referred to, have been designed by local authorities in many towns and cities in the UK, and they remain an important mechanism by which to reduce local emission from burning. Just to clarify about why the smoke, for instance, some study identified that wet wood can produce around 5 times more smoke emission than dry wood. An average smoke emission from burning wet wood on an open fire was around 21.1 grams per hour compared to only 4.6 grams per hour where burning dry wood on an open fire. Most people don't realize that the wood burning stove emit particles. That's because a fresh cut log of wood contains about a pint of water, and much of the heat energy is used to dry the water out, which causes the wood to smoke and smolder, releasing air pollutants. So the introduction of another regs that I'm going to discuss is about targeting the burning of certain smoking fuels and the wet wood. Let's talk about this upcoming one. So it's called the Air Quality Domestic Solid Fuel Standards, Regulations 2020 in England, and it's coming into force this Saturday on the 1st May, and are intended to reduce emission of particle matter from residential burning of wood and other solid fuels. The regulations will basically phase out the use of coal and unseasoned wet wood in residential heating appliances, and is including requirement for supply of fuels in 4 different categories: supply of wood, supply of manufactured solid fuel, supply of bituminous coal. As it stands, this legislation is only applicable within England. Bear in mind that the Clean Air Act will continue to be applied in England for smoke control area requirements, alongside the new Air Quality Regs 2020. So as I mentioned, from the 1st May, from Saturday, it will be legal for the sale and supply of wood fuel sold in a quantity of under 2 square meters if it's not an authorized wood fuel. And the wood logs will be required to have a confirmed moisture content of 20% or below. So it will be definitely dry. On the next slide, I will summarize the requirement for wood logs and for the smokeless fuels too. So the full supplier are classified as operate a retail premises, operate a retail website or online sales website, operate sales over the telephone or any other equipment as a method of sale. The supply of the fuel is classified the time in which exchange of goods has occurred point of sale, or if later during the dispatch of the fuel. The local authority officers will need to consider whether fuel sold for domestic burning meets the requirement of these new regulations. Just to summarize, all authorized fuels will also be required to be accompanied with the appropriate ready to burn logo. So you will see this ready to burn logo on the packages, including certification number for easier identification of the fuel. The wood logs for sale will have to be verified, as I mentioned, and have a content of moisture less than 20%. And for the smokeless fuel, as verified, they should emit less than 5 grams per hour of smoke emission. And they have to have a sulfur content no more than 2%. All must have an ID code, and the wood logs and the smoke fuel have to pass a specific test prior being introduced into the market and being considered conform with the regs. So definitely there will be more control on what can be sold. In terms of enforcement of these regs, the local authority remain responsible for the enforcement of the regulations within their catchment area for the ready-to-burn solid fuel, so sold, dispatched, or delivered to an address within a catchment area. As enforcement officers, undertake appropriate action and are eligible to enter a supplier's premises at any reasonable time, inspect a supplier goods, if deemed to be against the requirement of regulations, purchase test sample of a fuel supplier goods, and if officer deem that is an offense under the regulation to have taken place, powers are also granted to request the supplier documentation to prove legally of goods, question supplier or employees to the legality of goods, and if the person is obstructing the actions above, he's guilty of an offense and could be liable to a fine. If deemed an offense under the regulation has been committed, the officer are able to issue a penalty notice where the initial penalty for the offense is charged at £300. The offender will have then 28 days for making the payment. After this period, if the penalty is still unpaid, the local authority can escalate it to a fine, civil debt, or county court order. Official penalty notice shall also detail any right to the offender and how these rights may be exercised under the law. Third and final reg I want to discuss today with you, it's the upcoming Ecodesign regulations. The requirement on these regulations reflect what the UK agreed at EU level in 2018-2019. Since Brexit, DEFRA has confirmed his commitment to Ecodesign. This program aims to reduce emission, basically. In 2022, the Ecodesign regulations will come into force, which will mean that all new stoves will need to meet agreed emission standards, regardless of where they are used. This will raise the standard of appliances across the whole country. So from the 1st January 2022, all solid fuel burning appliances will be required to have been independently tested to show that they meet the seasonal efficiency and for emission limit provision as laid down with the Ecodesign regulation and clear skies. This will include a dramatic reduction in the PM minimum emission limit. Some tests have found that the particle matter limit for Ecodesign stove is 55% lower than the limit for DEFRA exempt stoves. So in simple words, are kinder to the environment. Welcome. Just to summarize the three upcoming regs and the environment bill. So the environment bill will increase the effectiveness of smoke control areas and will give new power to local authorities to take action in areas of high pollution. The air quality solid fuel standard regs will prohibit the sale of the most polluting fuels. And finally, the Ecodesign regulation will restrict to the minimum efficiency standard solid fuel room heater appliances available for sale by 2022. So all appliances that show the clear skies mark have been independently certified by the scheme administrator, confirming that they meet or exceed the forthcoming Ecodesign regulations. So just to conclude my presentation, I'm gonna see what could be the opportunities for local authorities and what could be the challenges with these upcoming new regs. First, I should say that local authorities have been instrumental in developing and delivering proactive and reactive services to protect the environment and the public health. So as an opportunity, these regs will give a new power for local authorities to take action in areas where are considered on a high pollution. There will be ability to issue a civil penalty instead of criminal that will assist to reduce the non-compliance. Raising awareness and educational campaigns about domestic burning emissions, including as well the harmful indoor air pollution that they cause. Responsibility on manufacturers to produce cleaner and more efficient appliances. So our role will be to check the compliance and provide advice to the local businesses about changes on the regs. Wood burning working groups are offering a way of sharing best practices and training to the officers, has been set up, for example, in London with the GLA. And as localized emissions for solid fuel burning are not completely well captured in the existing emission inventories and current measurement networks, this can be the right time to have a better understanding of solid fuel exposure hotspots that will enable local authorities to focus on interventions in hotspots. So basically, these are opportunities to contribute toward achieving reduction emission and population exposure to PM. Now I move to the challenges that the local authority can occur. The impact on long-standing austerity has diminished the capacity to deliver proactive enforcement and public awareness activities. This is a fact. And the old stove are still exempt. So wood burning stove and open fire have an extremely long lifespan, upwards of 20 years, and replacing them can be very expensive. Without incentives, the replacement of existing stove is likely to be slow. Perhaps the government should consider to help local authorities to increase the rate of upgrades for inefficient and polluting heating devices. Wood burning stoves market has increased. Lighting up a wood burning stove or an open fire remain hugely popular. As I mentioned earlier, there was an estimate 175,000 wood burners sold in the UK. And in terms of enforcement actions, the local authorities require an effective regulatory framework and a well-trained and efficient enforcement capability. The the capability of gathering evidence, enforcing, serving a penalty notice can be quite challenging. And final, the resources for training trading standard officer and environmental health officer could be another challenge. I just want to conclude with my final statement. As a final statement, I can remind to all of you that in terms of reduction air pollution, it's not the local government alone that can solve the problems at the local level. We all need to act together, businesses, citizen groups, residents, and others. We need to be involved in partnership so that the strength and capacities of one actor can overcome the shortcoming or deficiency of another actor, thus leading to more resolute action for the local environment. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Davide. That was really interesting. Thanks for giving an overview of some of these upcoming legislative changes. I was particularly interested to hear about how in urban areas, wood burning stoves are often used more decoratively than as a primary heating source. So there definitely seems to be a big role in terms of, as you mentioned, educational campaigns and public engagement, which also fits with your final statement there of needing to include everyone in order to improve our air quality. So thank you, that was really interesting. We're going to dive straight into questions. We've already got some coming in. So let me just have a look at what we've got in. So one question is, how likely is it that Brexit will affect the UK's adoption of the Ecodesign regulations?
Yeah, good question. DEFRA has already confirmed that the Ecodesign will be applied in the UK. It will be transferred to a UK legislation, and they completely committed to these regs. Basically, they see the Ecodesign as a beneficial. So even if there's been a Brexit, they see that they want to include on UK legislation. So I'm sure that from 2022, Ecodesign will be part of our legislation, will be enforced.
Okay, that's good to hear. And the next question is, how do the regulations affect rural areas where a lot of residences may not be on mains gas and have open fires as a heating source?
Yeah, good question. Basically, in rural areas, if they're not in a smoke control areas, they are able to burn certain type of fuels that are not in a smoke control area. Therefore, there is less restrictions in the rural areas. And I understand that in the rural areas, that could be the primary heating source. So I wouldn't, basically, I just want to say, I understand you can't ban stoves or fireplace from a rural area where that is, again, I just reiterate the message, it can be used as a primary source. My main concern is more about on a big cities like London, like Manchester. I struggle to see as the stoves being used as a primary heating system. So I would discourage everybody to use if it's not the primary one.
Great, thank you. And kind of slightly related, is if at the moment civil penalties will only apply in smoke control areas, do you think local authorities are likely to introduce new ones? Do you think these are likely to kind of increase in number across the country?
Right, good question. Right, I think in the smoke control area, it's gonna be applied. Outside the smoke control areas, I can't say that is something that the government has to put in place, or alternatively should be the local authority, but that is not going to be an easy task to change on the local level. It has to be decided on the national government if they want to change to civil penalty or not.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any idea the kind of numbers of prosecutions which have taken place in recent years in smoke control areas, for example, in the UK or in London?
Yeah. I have to say there's not been many. From my experience working on this sector, as you mentioned, for 15 years, and talking with my colleagues from other local authorities, not many. It was really difficult to enforce and take enough evidence to end up in court. Therefore, I think really, if I would say probably just few, if none, I would say. So hopefully with the changes, then it will be easier to enforce. Otherwise, we can see there was kind of difficulties to enforce.
Great, thank you. And someone's asked about the practical distinctions between wood being sold, for example, for things like carpentry, and wood that's sold for fuel. Will it just be labeling and pricing, or will the regulations define other things more specifically?
Well, sorry, just I didn't catch the questions. If you can just tell me again.
No problem. So in terms of the practical distinction between
Yeah.
wood that's sold for other activities such as carpentry and wood that is being sold for fuel, will it just be labeling and pricing that will distinguish between these two, or will the regulations define other things more specifically?
Right. The regulation will just put in place what can be burned in a domestic appliance. You will still be able to find other type, I think, other type of fuel if it's not for domestic burning. For the domestic burning, as I say, they will have a logo ready to burn, and that is a kind of the certificate, and what is clearly mentioned that is it's something you can burn in your stove or in your fireplace. If I assume in the market there will be other stuff, as you mentioned, for other purposes, so that could be quite tricky to find out exactly, because in theory you can still buy and then use on a wood stove or on a fireplace.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really challenging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Another attendee said that PM 2.5 has a strong transboundary component. What do you think local authorities can do to better understand where to focus attention? Is a wider particulate matter measurement network planned?
Yes, we know that, as I mentioned earlier, we know there are different sources, yeah, and they were split in different categories. We know the main, I would say the transport, we know that it's a major contributor. So definitely the transport related PM 2.5 emissions is quite important, try to reduce it. But as I say, the domestic, I think has been, that's my view. I think they have been not been considered so much as a main component, as a main source of PM 2.5 emissions. So I would personally think in the next few years, take a PM 2.5 from domestic burning should be a priority for the local authority. And I should say that my presentation wasn't about bonfires, but again, bonfires we know that can contain your burning wood. That could be another emission for PM, another source for emission for PM 2.5. So probably I would say something should be done as well on bonfires. And I'm not going too much in details about bonfires as is not the remit of this presentation, but so domestic and transportation are two key sources for PM 2.5, where the local authorities should focus more in the future.
Great, thank you, Davide. In the new amendment, with them reducing from it being a criminal offence to a civil offence, in cases where payment may not be too much of a, it might not be too much of a problem, do you think people are going to be more likely to non-comply?
Good question. Absolutely. I would say that if you already get a penalty and you get a fine, and you got enough evidence, and they decide to carry on, I think the local authority will have a chance to have another fine, so they can fine them more than once, and they can escalate to a more action. So I personally think this the penalty should make them to change they will try to, I think they will change their behavior, let's say behavior, or they will comply with the regs. We will see.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And then another person's asked about how easy it is to identify properties which may have wood burning stoves. Is there a registration process for them? And if so, who holds this data?
There is a registration process that is it's called HITAS. They are the main body. They register and they have a certificate. So once they install a new stove that comply with the law, they get this certification. And occasion when I get complaints and I go out and do some inspection on stoves, I normally request them to see the HITAS certification. And it's a good practice as well to send a certificate to the local building control team, so they would have a record as well of your appliance.
Great, thank you. And this might be the final question. I think I'm really sorry to everyone whose questions I didn't get to. That we've just had loads of interest, which has been really great. But I've done as many as I can. So finally, I just want to think about, how do you believe the UK's new legislation compares to other developed countries? Do we have similar legislation in place, or are we leading the way or lagging behind?
There has been a lot of talks about the PM 2.5 limits, about the WHO. I'm not sure where we are now from a government point of view on having these long-term emission limits. I personally think now we got enough technology. We can monitor more and more on details about PM 2.5. We have more evidence on how it could have an impact on our health. So I would say we are at a good stage, but definitely we need to make sure we got in place legislation about reducing PM 2.5.
Great. Well, thank you once again, Davide. That was really interesting. Really appreciate you taking the time to give this webinar. And thank you to everyone who's attended. It's great to see so many of you here and to be so engaged in the content. I hope that you found it beneficial and informative. And please do record your attendance on the ISCPD tool. As I mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on the IES website and YouTube channel. And just to let you know that the next IAQM webinar will be held on the 20th of May, in which Anna Gracino will be presenting on how multivariate cost-benefit analysis can drive effective air quality management, using some case studies based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So please do register for this on the IAQM website. Thank you once again, Davide, and to everyone attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ethan.